Imagine waking up one day and realizing that something in your life has completely shifted. The things that once troubled you no longer have the same grip. A deep, unshakable peace has settled in your heart, even in the midst of chaos. Doors that were once closed have suddenly opened, and the love you feel, both for God and for others, burns like never before. You find yourself drawn to surrender everything to Him, not out of fear, but out of an overwhelming trust that His ways are higher. What if I told you that these are not just random experiences, but clear signs that God has visited you? When the Almighty steps into a life, He does not do so quietly. His presence shakes foundations, transforms hearts, and redirects destinies. Yet many people fail to recognize His visitation because they expect something dramatic, lightning in the sky, a voice from heaven. But often His presence is revealed in ways that are deeply personal, undeniable, and life-altering. In this message, I'm going to share 5 powerful signs that prove God has visited you. These signs are not based on emotions or fleeting moments, but on the unmistakable ways He moves when He draws near. By the time we reach the end, you may realize that God has already been working in your life, waiting for you to recognize and respond to His presence. So stay with me until the very last word, because if you've ever wondered whether God has stepped into your life, this message might just give you the answer you've been searching for. Let's begin. When God visits a person, a community, or even an entire generation, one of the clearest signs is a renewed hunger for holiness. This is not a mere intellectual realization of right and wrong, nor is it a fleeting emotion that comes and goes with circumstances. It is a deep, unshakable yearning to be set apart for God, to walk in righteousness, and to turn away from anything that hinders intimacy with Him. This hunger is not self-generated. It is not the product of human willpower or a resolution to be better. Rather, it is a work of the Spirit, a sign that God is moving upon the heart. Just as the presence of fire purifies gold, the presence of God stirs within a person the desire to be free from every impurity. There is an inner awareness of the weight of sin, not in a condemning or hopeless way, but in a way that makes a person long for the beauty of holiness. What once seemed harmless may now feel burdensome. What once was tolerated in speech, in thought, in action suddenly becomes unbearable, because it hinders the closeness one desires with God. This longing for holiness is not rooted in legalism. Legalism attempts to achieve righteousness through human effort, creating an endless cycle of striving and failure. But when God visits, holiness is not a duty, it is a delight. It is not about rules, but about relationship. A person touched by God does not see obedience as a heavy burden, but as a privilege, a joyful response to the one who has drawn near. It is the same desire that made Moses cry out, "Show me your glory," and that caused Isaiah to fall on his face and declare, "Woe is me, for I am a man of unclean lips." Holiness becomes the heart's pursuit not because of fear, but because of love. There is a tangible shift in priorities when this hunger takes hold. Entertainment that once seemed harmless now feels empty. Words that were once spoken carelessly are now measured with reverence. Time that was once wasted is now redeemed for things that draw the soul closer to God. Prayer ceases to be an obligation and becomes a necessity, a place of deep communion where holiness is not just sought, but imparted. The Word of God is no longer just read, but absorbed, shaping thoughts, renewing the mind and cleansing the heart. A renewed hunger for holiness does not mean perfection, nor does it mean a person will never struggle. But what it does mean is that the struggle is now different. Instead of complacency, there is conviction. Instead of justifying sin, there is a desire to be free from it. Instead of hiding from God, there is a running toward Him, knowing that only He can make the heart pure. Even failures do not produce despair, but drive a person back to the mercy of God, where grace does not excuse sin, but empowers victory over it. This kind of hunger is contagious. When one person experiences it, it spreads to others. Families change, churches awaken, communities are transformed. What was once tolerated in the culture of believers is no longer accepted because God's presence has made compromise impossible. Revival has always been marked by a return to holiness, not because of human effort, but because when God visits, He does not leave His people the same. His holiness demands response, and those who have truly encountered Him can never be content with anything less than a life set apart for His glory. When God visits a person, one of the most unmistakable signs is an unshakable peace amidst life's storms. This is not an ordinary peace that comes from favorable circumstances, nor is it a temporary relief from anxiety. It is a deep, abiding peace that transcends human understanding, a peace that remains steadfast even when everything around seems to be falling apart. It is not merely the absence of trouble, but the presence of God Himself, anchoring the soul in a way that defies reason. This kind of peace is not something one can manufacture through positive thinking or sheer willpower. It is not the result of controlling one's environment or eliminating all sources of stress. It is entirely supernatural, given by God to those whom He has drawn near. When He visits, His peace settles upon the heart like a heavy yet comforting presence. It silences the fears that once roared so loudly. It calms the anxieties that used to dominate the mind. It does not remove trials, but it transforms how they are experienced. Instead of being overwhelmed by difficulties, a person finds themselves strangely at rest, trusting in something beyond what the eye can see. This peace is often most evident in times of great turmoil. When the storms of life come, whether through loss, sickness, financial hardship, or bitterness, but when God has visited a person, there is a different response. There is a quiet assurance that, no matter how fierce the winds blow, one is held in the hands of a sovereign and loving God. This is why those who have experienced divine peace can walk through suffering with a confidence that baffles others. They do not deny the pain or pretend that trials are easy, but they are not consumed by them. There is an inner stillness that cannot be explained apart from the presence of God. This peace is rooted in trust. When God draws near, He imparts a greater revelation of who He is. His faithfulness becomes more than just a doctrine. It becomes a lived reality. His goodness is no longer merely believed in theory, but experienced in the depths of the soul. When this happens, trust replaces worry. The need to control outcomes fades because there is a deep awareness that God is already in control. Even when circumstances do not make sense, even when prayers seem unanswered, the heart remains at peace because it is resting in the character of God, not in temporary relief from problems. Such peace does not mean the absence of emotions. It does not mean one never feels sadness, disappointment, or frustration, but it does mean that these emotions do not rule. They come, but they do not shake the foundation. They may bring tears, but they do not bring despair. A person who has been visited by God may still feel the weight of trials, but they carry them differently. The burden is no longer crushing because it has been placed in the hands of one who is greater. This peace also changes how a person interacts with others. When fear is removed, love can flow freely. When anxiety is silenced, patience increases. When the heart is at rest, there is room for compassion rather than reactionary anger. Relationships are transformed because the need to control, manipulate, or demand is replaced by a quiet confidence that God is working all things together for good. The presence of God not only brings peace internally, but also allows that peace to extend outward, affecting everyone it touches. When God visits, this peace does not come and go with circumstances. It remains. It becomes an unshakable reality that carries a person through every storm, testifying that their hope is built on something, or rather, someone who cannot be moved. When God visits a person, one of the most profound and unmistakable signs is that their heart is set ablaze with love. This is not a shallow emotion or a fleeting feeling, but a deep, consuming transformation of the soul. It is a love that surpasses human understanding, a love that changes the way one sees God, oneself, and others. It is not merely an increased capacity to care, but a radical shift in affections, priorities, and motivations. The heart, once cold, indifferent, or self-focused, becomes tender, compassionate, and driven by a desire to love as God loves. This love first manifests as a burning love for God Himself. When He visits, He does not come as an idea or a distant figure, but as a living reality. His presence overwhelms the soul with a sense of His goodness, beauty, and majesty. Suddenly, God is no longer just a concept to be believed in, but a person to be cherished. The mind may have always known that He is worthy of worship, but now the heart feels it in a way that cannot be denied. There is a longing to be near Him, to know Him more, to spend time in His presence through prayer, worship, and His word. The distractions that once seemed so important lose their grip, because nothing compares to the sweetness of communion with Him. This love does not remain confined to personal devotion, but spills over into every area of life. It transforms relationships, causing love to replace resentment, bitterness, and selfishness. Those who once seemed difficult to forgive are now seen through the lens of grace. The burdens of others, once ignored, become a personal concern. Compassion rises where indifference once ruled. This is not something that can be manufactured or forced. It is the natural result of encountering the love of God. The heart is no longer content with merely existing. It longs to give, to serve, to bless, to reflect the love it has received. Love for people takes on a new dimension. It is no longer based on convenience or mutual benefit, but is rooted in something deeper. There is a willingness to love the unlovable, to extend kindness without expecting anything in return, to sacrifice for others with joy rather than reluctance. Even those who have caused pain or betrayal are no longer seen as enemies, but as individuals in need of the same love and grace that was received. There is an inability to hold grudges because the heart is too full of God's love to make room for bitterness. This love also fuels a passion for sharing the truth. When the heart is set ablaze by God, it cannot remain silent. There is an urgency to tell others about Him, not out of obligation, but out of an overflow of love. It is like discovering the most wonderful treasure and desperately wanting others to experience it as well. Evangelism and discipleship are no longer seen as religious duties, but as acts of love, desiring that others taste and see the goodness of God. The heart breaks for those who do not yet know Him, and every opportunity to share His love is seen as a privilege rather than a burden. This burning love changes everything. It redefines success, shifting priorities from selfish ambition to kingdom purpose. It reshapes identity, no longer striving for approval from people, but resting in the love of God. It sustains in trials, allowing one to endure suffering with joy because love has replaced fear. It turns everyday life into an act of worship, where every word, action, and decision is motivated by love for God and love for others. When God visits, He does not leave the heart untouched. He ignites it, transforms it, and fills it with a love so powerful that it cannot be contained. When God visits a person, one of the undeniable signs is that doors begin to open in ways that defy human logic. These are not merely coincidences or the result of personal effort, but divine alignments that make the impossible possible. What once seemed like an unmovable barrier suddenly shifts. Paths that were closed for years open effortlessly. Opportunities appear that no human could have orchestrated. This is the hand of God at work, making a way where there was none, and proving that when He decides to move, no force in heaven or earth can stop it. This kind of divine intervention often comes when all human attempts have failed. A person may have tried every possible method, exhausted every resource, and found no success. Yet, when God steps in, what seemed unreachable becomes attainable without striving. The same job that rejected an application multiple times suddenly extends an offer. The financial breakthrough that seemed impossible arrives unexpectedly. The relationship that appeared broken beyond repair is restored in ways no one could have foreseen. These are not the results of mere persistence or chance, but clear evidence that God is moving. God's openings are not always about external success. Sometimes they are about spiritual breakthroughs. A person who struggled for years with addiction or a habitual sin finds themselves walking in freedom, not because of self-discipline alone, but because God has removed chains that no amount of effort could break. A heart that was closed off to Him is suddenly softened, eager to listen and obey. The ability to understand His word and hear His voice becomes clearer, as if a veil has been lifted. The struggle to pray or worship fades as hunger for His presence takes over. These are doors that no human can open on their own, only God can. When God opens a door, it comes with peace. There is no need to force it or manipulate circumstances. There is no anxiety about whether it will last. The opportunities He provides do not come with the stress and pressure that worldly success demands. Instead, there is a quiet confidence, an assurance that this is His doing and not human striving. Even if challenges arise, there is an underlying certainty that what He has set in motion cannot be undone. The opposition may come, but it cannot close what He has opened. The fear of failure diminishes because the focus is no longer on personal ability, but on divine sovereignty. The doors God opens often lead to unexpected places. A person may have been praying for one thing but received something even greater. What seemed like a small opportunity turns into something far beyond what was imagined. The steps of faith He calls a person to take may not always make sense in the moment, but they lead to something far better than anything they could have planned. There is a stretching, a growth, a deepening of trust as they walk through doors that only He could have unlocked. It requires obedience and faith. It is not enough to recognize that God has made a way. One must step into it with courage. Sometimes, an open door requires leaving behind comfort, familiarity, or personal plans. It may demand a surrender of control, a willingness to trust even when the full picture is not visible. But those who walk through the doors God opens always find that what awaits on the other side is greater than anything they left behind. When God visits, He does not just change hearts, He changes circumstances. He removes obstacles that seem permanent. He brings opportunities that no human could have arranged. He clears paths that once seemed impossible to walk. And when He opens a door, nothing and no one can shut it. When God visits a person, one of the clearest signs is a call to deeper surrender. This is not a vague feeling or a momentary inspiration, but an undeniable pull to lay everything before Him. It is a divine invitation to let go of self-will, personal ambitions, and earthly securities in exchange for a life fully yielded to His purposes. This call is not gentle or optional. It is a compelling, irresistible stirring in the soul that refuses to be ignored. Those who experience it find themselves unable to continue life as usual because something inside has changed. They have encountered God in such a way that neutrality is no longer possible. Surrender is not merely about giving up bad things. It is about releasing control, even over the good. It is about trusting God so completely that nothing is held back. The dreams and goals once held tightly must be placed in His hands. The plans carefully crafted over the years must be surrendered to His will. Even personal identity, comfort, and security are no longer the priority. This kind of surrender does not come from fear or obligation, but from a place of deep love and trust. When God visits, He reveals Himself so profoundly that surrender is no longer seen as a sacrifice, but as the only reasonable response. This call to deeper surrender often disrupts the status quo. What once seemed sufficient in a person's walk with God suddenly feels inadequate. Prayers that were once casual become desperate cries for more of Him. The desire for comfort and predictability fades in comparison to the longing to be fully used by God. A person may find themselves compelled to leave behind familiar places, relationships, or habits that no longer align with what He is calling them to. The pursuit of success, recognition, or personal fulfillment loses its grip because the only thing that truly matters is obedience. Surrender is rarely easy because it requires trust in the unseen. It demands faith that God's plans are better than personal desires, even when they are not fully understood. It often comes with a season of wrestling, where the heart struggles to let go of control. There is a temptation to hold on to certain areas of life, to surrender some things but not all. Yet, true surrender does not allow for partial obedience. It is an all or no response. Those who resist it find themselves restless, torn between their own will and God's calling. But those who embrace it experience a freedom that cannot be found anywhere else. When God calls a person to deeper surrender, He does not leave them empty-handed. He replaces fear with peace, uncertainty with purpose, and weakness with divine strength. He does not ask for surrender to take something away, but to give something greater in return. Those who answer His call often step into opportunities they never imagined. They see His power move in ways they never expected. They walk in a level of faith and intimacy with Him that was previously unknown. Surrender does not lead to loss. It leads to life. Real, abundant, God-filled life. This call is never just for personal transformation. Those who truly surrender become instruments in His hands. They impact those around them, not through their own abilities, but through His power working in them. Their lives become testimonies of what God can do with someone fully yielded to Him. They no longer seek their own glory, but His. They no longer live for themselves, but for the one who called them. When God visits, He does not simply ask for a part of a person's life. He asks for everything. And those who answer that call will never be the same again. When God visits, He does not come quietly or without effect. His presence brings undeniable change. He awakens a hunger for holiness, fills the heart with unshakable peace, ignites a consuming love, opens doors no one can shut, and calls us to a deeper surrender. These signs are not random. They are clear markers that the living God has drawn near, not only to bless but to transform. His visitation is not meant to be a fleeting moment, but an invitation to a life forever changed by His presence. If you have seen these signs in your life, know that He is calling you closer. He is awakening something deeper within you, stirring you toward greater faith, greater love, and greater purpose. Do not resist His movement. Embrace it. Walk through the doors He opens. Let go of what He is asking you to surrender. Allow His holiness to shape you, His peace to sustain you, and His love to overflow from you. May you walk in the fullness of His presence, knowing that when God visits, He does not leave things as they were. He makes all things new. May His peace be your anchor, His love be your fire, and His will be your highest desire. Good luck on your journey of faith, and may you always recognize His hand upon your life. Thank you for listening, and may God bless you abundantly.